Commander Li Guan rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the massive holographic display that dominated the command center on Earth's orbital station. The star map showed the outer rim territories in flickering lights, each one representing a different alien civilization. As he watched, another red marker suddenly went dark and disappeared completely. His heart sank. "That's the 17th one," he whispered to himself, making a note on his tablet. 17 entire civilizations gone silent in just 3 months. The other officers in the command center were starting to notice the pattern too. Lieutenant Commander Bei Soman approached his station with a worried expression. "Sir, the Galactic Council is completely panicking. Nobody knows what's happening out there in the outer rim." Guan nodded grimly. For the past 200 years, humanity had chosen to stay isolated in the Sol system. Focusing on peace and scientific advancement, they had built a perfect society, free from war and conflict. But now, something terrible was happening in the far reaches of the galaxy, and the distress signals were getting stronger every day. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Captain Park Min-ho was having the worst day of his life. The Kepler Mining Consortium's asteroid facility had been his home for the past 5 years. It was a massive structure built into a hollowed-out asteroid, housing over 10,000 workers from dozens of different alien species. The facility was supposed to be safe, hidden in the empty space between star systems. But today, that safety had shattered like glass. "Captain, we're getting multiple contacts on long-range sensors," shouted Engineering Chief Yudong Yuk from across the control room. "They're big, sir, really big." Min-ho rushed to the sensor station and felt his blood turn cold. The display showed dozens of massive objects approaching their position. But these weren't normal spaceships. They looked organic, like giant insects, made of metal and flesh. Each one was the size of a small moon, and they were moving fast. "What in the galaxy are those things?" whispered Communications Officer Kim Nari, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the first wave of attackers arrived. The Vorthok swarm had found them. These creatures were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships were living beings, biomechanical horrors that could adapt and evolve during battle. They didn't just destroy their enemies, they consumed them, absorbing their technology and knowledge to become even stronger. The facility's automated defense systems opened fire, sending streams of plasma bolts toward the approaching swarm. For a moment, it looked like the weapons were working. Several of the smaller bioships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. But then something horrifying happened. The remaining creatures began to change, their outer shells shifting and adapting to resist the plasma fire. "They're learning from our attacks," screamed Tactical Officer Lee Kangman. "The weapons that worked a minute ago are useless now." The facility shook violently as the first Vorthok bioship slammed into the outer hull. The lights flickered, and emergency alarms began blaring throughout the station. Min-ho could hear the sound of metal tearing as the creatures began to literally eat their way through the facility's defenses. "All frequencies open." Min-ho shouted to Kim Nari, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Send the emergency beacon on all known galactic channels." Narisa's hands shook as she worked frantically at her console. Around them, the control room was falling apart. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits, and the air was thick with smoke. Through the viewport, they could see the Vorthok creatures swarming over the facility like hungry parasites. "Sir, I'm getting reports from all sections," called out Security Chief Park Hyun-woo, his face pale with fear. "The creatures are inside the facility. Not just destroying everything, they're absorbing it. It's the metal, the technology, even the... .. He paused, unable to finish the sentence. "Even the people," Min-ho said quietly, understanding the horrible truth. These weren't just invaders. They were consumers, treating entire civilizations like food. The facility shuddered again as another bioship attached itself to the hull. Through the security cameras, Min-ho could see the nightmare unfolding in the corridors below. The Vorthok creatures were like giant centipedes made of living metal, with hundreds of tentacles that could reshape themselves into any tool they needed. They moved through the facility with terrifying intelligence, systematically consuming everything in their path. Message is ready, sir, Nari reported, tears streaming down her face, broadcasting on all frequencies. Minho grabbed the communication microphone with trembling hands. He knew this might be the last message anyone would ever hear from Kepler. Station. This is Kepler Station to any military force capable of response. We are under attack by hostile aliens. Designation, Vorthok Swarm. 17 species confirmed extinct.
Oh.
Our coordinates are attached to this message. These creatures consume everything. Technology, resources, life itself. They adapt to any weapon used against them. Please, if anyone can hear this, someone help us. Don't let them reach the core worlds. Don't let them find Earth. The message shot across the void toward the Sol system, carrying with it the desperate hope of 10,000 souls. It would take months to reach its destination, traveling through the dark emptiness of space toward a humanity that had been sleeping, peacefully, completely unaware that the galaxy was screaming for help as the transmission ended. The lights in the control room finally went out, and the screaming began. Lieutenant Choi Daeon was halfway through her third cup of coffee when the universe changed forever. She had been pulling the night shift at Earth's orbital command center for 6 months now, monitoring the deep space communication arrays that mostly picked up cosmic background radiation and the occasional automated trading beacon from distant colonies. The job was supposed to be boring. Humanity had been at peace for 2 centuries, and nobody expected that to change anytime soon. Most people had forgotten that Earth even had military installations anymore. The Ghost Fleet was just a legend, something old veterans whispered about in bars, but then the signal came through. At first it sounded like static, mixed with electronic noise. Daeon almost ignored it, thinking it was just interference from a solar storm. But there was something different about this signal. It had a pattern, a desperate rhythm that made her skin crawl. She adjusted the filters and ran it through the translation matrix. The words that came out made her drop her coffee cup. "Holy stars," she whispered, staring at the translated message on her screen. Her hands shook as she read about the Vorthok. Swarm about 17 extinct civilizations, about creatures that consumed everything in their path. This wasn't just a distress call. This was a warning about the end of everything. She hit the emergency alert button so hard, she almost broke it. Within minutes, the command center was buzzing with activity. Officers who had been sleeping were rushing to their stations, pulling on uniforms and trying to make sense of what was happening. But one man moved through the chaos with calm purpose. Admiral Han Kun-tae was 73 years old, the gray hair and scars on his hands that told stories of humanity's violent past. He had fought in the last Great War before the peace began, and he was one of the few people alive who remembered what humanity was really capable of. When pushed to the limit, he studied the alien message with the careful attention of someone who had seen civilizations burn before. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes grew darker with each word he read. "Sir," said Lieutenant Colonel Kim Jae-on, the Night Watch commander, "we've confirmed the signal's authenticity. It's definitely from the Outer Rim, and the energy signature matches the reports of the lost civilizations." Kung-tae nodded slowly. "How long since the message was sent?" "Based on the transmission delay, approximately 4 months, sir." "If this Vorthok swarm is still expanding at the rate described in the message, they'll reach the core systems within a year," Kung-tae finished. "Maybe less." Colonel Yoon Sora appeared at his shoulder. She was the commander of the Ghost Fleet. Protocols, a position that hadn't been activated in living memory. Her job was to oversee humanity's most closely guarded secret, the sleeping war machines that floated in the darkness around Jupiter's moons. "Sir, what are your orders?" she asked quietly. The command center fell silent. Everyone knew what those words meant. The Ghost Fleet hadn't been awakened since the Treaty of Mars ended humanity's last war. Most people believed the stories about the fleet were just propaganda. It's designed to keep potential enemies afraid of attacking Earth. They were wrong. Kyung-tae's jaw tightened as he made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. Wake them up. All of them. Sora's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "Understood, sir." Initiating Ghost Fleet Revival Protocol Alpha. The next few hours were like watching a sleeping giant wake up from a 200-year nap. Around Jupiter's moons, in hidden shipyards that had been disguised as research stations, massive dreadnoughts began stirring to life. These weren't the sleek, peaceful vessels that humanity used for exploration and trade. These were instruments of war, built by a species that had nearly destroyed itself learning how to kill efficiently. The flagship Indomitable was the first to power up. Captain Song Wusong had been in cryogenic sleep for 40 years, waiting for this moment. As his ship's systems came online, he could feel the familiar hum of the quantum engines and the subtle vibration of weapons charging. It felt like coming home. Ghost Fleet Command, this is Indomitable Actual, he reported. His voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. Primary systems online. Crew revival in progress. The heavy cruiser Vengeance under Captain Lee Min-seo. The assault carrier Phoenix commanded by Captain Park Jun. Destroyer squadrons. Fighter wings. Support vessels. An entire fleet that had been hidden from the galaxy for 2 centuries, but the ships were just the beginning. On Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, massive underground facilities were coming to life. Thousands of soldiers who had volunteered for extended cryogenic service were being awakened. These weren't peacekeepers or explorers. They were warriors, trained in every form of combat humanity had ever devised. Major General Nam Soyan opened her eyes in the revival chamber and immediately reached for her sidearm. Even after decades of sleep, her instincts were sharp. Around her other soldiers were awakening with the same deadly grace. The Ghost Army was rising. Status report, she demanded as medical technicians helped her out of the cryopod. Ma'am, we have a code black situation, reported Colonel Jang Minki. Alien invasion force. Multiple species extinct. Admiral Kyun-tae has activated full mobilization protocols. Soyeon smiled grimly. She had trained her entire life for this moment. Then it's time to remind the galaxy why humanity chose peace. On the Indomitable, Captain Wusong stood on his bridge as his crew took their positions. These men and women had given up normal lives to serve as humanity's hidden guardians. They had slept while their families aged and died, waiting for a war that everyone hoped would never come, now that war was here. Ghost Fleet Actual to all vessels, Wushang broadcasts across the fleet communication network. Humanity goes to war again. The response was immediate. Across dozens of ships, thousands of voices answered as one. For Earth, for humanity. The galaxy. Sleeping giants were awake, and they were very, very angry. The jump to hyperspace ended with a flash of brilliant light, and suddenly the human fleet was there. One moment the Kepler system was empty except for the dying station, and the nightmarish creatures consuming it. The next moment, 47 warships materialized from the void, like ghosts stepping out of a dream. Admiral Han Kyung-tae stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his weathered hands gripping the command rail as he stared at the horror before them. The Kepler mining station was barely recognizable. What had once been a gleaming facility built into a massive asteroid was the Vorthok swarm had transformed it into something that looked like a diseased heart pumping with stolen energy. Sweet. Mother of Earth, whispered Captain Song Wusong, his voice barely audible. What are those things? Ace. The Vorthok bioships were unlike anything in the galaxy's databases. They moved through space like living creatures, their hulls rippling and changing shape as they fed. Some were as large as battleships, covered in tentacles that reached out to grab debris and consume it. Others were smaller, darting between. The larger vessels, like parasites around a host. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy readings from the swarm, reported Lieutenant Commander Park Jin-soo from the sensor station. They're not just destroying the station, they're absorbing it, converting the matter into more bioships. Navigator Kim Tae-young turned from his console with a pale face. Admiral, I'm picking up distress signals from inside the station. There are still survivors in there. Kung-tae's jaw tightened. Every instinct told him to open fire immediately, to blast these creatures into cosmic dust before they could spread any further. But there were innocent people trapped in that nightmare, and humanity didn't abandon those who called for help. Open all channels, he commanded. Let's see if these things can be reasoned with. The communications officer, Lieutenant Jung Su-Yang, nodded and activated the broadcast system. Kung Tae's voice carried across the void with the authority of a species that had once conquered half the galaxy. Alien vessel, this is Admiral Han Kung Tae of the Terran Defense Force. You are engaged in hostile action against civilian targets. Withdraw immediately or face destruction. The response came not as words, but as a wave of pure psychic energy that crashed over the human fleet like a tsunami of hatred. I think it was the sound of 1 billion hungry mouths screaming in unison, the rage of a species that existed only to consume and destroy. Lesser beings would have been driven insane by the sheer malevolence of it, but humans were not lesser beings. Interesting, said Major Shinji Ho from the tactical station, his voice calm. Despite the psychic assault, they're using some form of telepathic communication. It's probably a hive mind structure. Kung Tae smiled grimly. Record that transmission and run it through the psychology department. I want to know what makes these things tick. While the Admiral was speaking, Captain Song was already coordinating the fleet's response. All vessels assume defensive formation Delta 7 around the station. Priority is protecting any survivors. Weapon systems to standby, but do not fire unless fired upon. The human ships moved with practiced precision, their sleek hulls cutting through space as they took positions around the dying station. Indomitable led the formation, her massive bulk serving as a shield between the Vorthok creatures and the most vulnerable areas of the facility. Admiral called out Lieutenant on Cialun from the tactical station, I'm getting detailed scans of the enemy formations. The swarm shows no conventional technology. They're using organic weapons that adapt to enemy fire patterns. Sir, based on the energy signatures, these creatures have absorbed technology from at least a dozen different species. They're using Calarian plasma cannons, Xanthari shield generators, even what looks like modified human mining lasers. On the main view screen, they could see the horrible truth of what Lieutenant Cialoni was describing. The Vorthok bioships were covered in technological growths that pulsed with alien energy. Weapons that had once belonged to proud civilizations now served these parasitic monsters. They're not just killing other species, realized Captain Song. They're stealing everything. Knowledge, technology, probably even memories. Look at the formation patterns, added Major Jiho, highlighting sections of the swarm on his tactical display. They're using vegan defensive strategies mixed with Arcturian assault tactics. These things are learning from every species they encounter. Kung Tae studied the enemy formation with the eye of a veteran warrior. Bioships, while allowing the smaller ones to dart in and attack from multiple angles. It was a strategy that had probably worked against every species. Sir, the lead bioship is moving toward us, reported the sensor officer. It's trying to communicate. Again, the second psychic scream was even more intense than the first. This time, the alien thoughts came with images, flashes of consumed worlds, dying civilizations, and the endless hunger that drove the swarm forward. They showed the humans what had happened to the 17 extinct species, the way entire planets had been stripped bare and converted into more bioships. The message was clear: surrender or be consumed. Well, said Admiral Kung Tae, his voice carrying 2 centuries of human military tradition that was rude. He turned to his tactical officer with a cold smile that would have made a shark nervous, Lieutenant Cialuni. Show me what these creatures are really capable of. I want full spectrum analysis on their adaptive systems. Already running, sir, she replied, her fingers dancing across the tactical console. But Admiral, the data is ... disturbing. These creatures have been consuming civilizations for potentially thousands of years. They've encountered almost every type of weapon and defense system in the galaxy. Kung Tae nodded slowly. Then they haven't met humans before. Around the bridge, the crew exchanged glances. They all knew what that meant. Humanity had been isolated for 200 years, developing weapons and tactics that no other species had ever seen. The Vorthok swarm had adapted to fight every known form of warfare in the galaxy, but human warfare was about to become known. It was going to be a very unpleasant introduction. The Vorthok swarm attacked like a living hurricane. 10,000. Bioships surged forward in a writhing mass of teeth and tentacles, their organic hulls pulsing with stolen energy from 17 dead civilizations. They had used this same overwhelming assault to crush every species they had encountered, flooding their enemies with sheer numbers until resistance collapsed. But as the wave of alien nightmares crashed against the human fleet, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't break. They didn't scatter in panic like the other species had done. Instead, they did something that the Vorthok had never seen before. They smiled. "Contact in 30 seconds, reported Lieutenant Ancille Lunier from the tactical station aboard the Indomitable. "Enemy formation is ... chaotic, sir. They're just rushing straight at us." Admiral Kung Tae watched the approaching swarm with the calm expression of a man who had seen this kind of battle before. They're used to fighting scared prey. They don't know how to fight predators. Captain Song Wusong stood beside him, studying the enemy formation with professional interest. "Sir, their attack pattern suggests they've never encountered coordinated resistance. They're treating us like another helpless colony." "Then let's educate them," Kung Tae said quietly. "All ships, weapons free. Show them what 200 years of human military evolution looks like." The Indomitable fired first. Her quantum cannons discharged with a sound like reality tearing apart, sending streams of pure energy that carved through the leading Vorthok. Bioships like a hot knife through butter, where other species had used plasma bolts and particle beams. Humanity had learned to weaponize the fundamental forces of the universe itself. The first wave of bioships simply ceased to exist. One moment they were there, tentacles reaching out hungrily. The next moment they were expanding clouds of superheated gas. Their adaptive armor useless against weapons that attacked matter at the quantum level. "Direct hits on the lead formation," reported the weapons officer. "Enemy vessels are gone, sir." But the swarm was vast, and losing a few dozen ships meant nothing to creatures that had consumed entire star systems. The surviving bioships began to adapt, their hulls shifting and changing to resist the quantum fire. Within seconds, they had developed new armor configurations that could deflect the human weapons. "Sir, they're adapting to our quantum cannons," called out Lieutenant Xialun. "Their armor is evolving in real time," Kung Tae nodded calmly. "Exactly as expected. Execute. Pattern Omega 7. What happened next was a masterpiece of military coordination that had taken humanity 2 centuries to perfect. The human fleet suddenly scattered, breaking formation in what looked like a chaotic retreat. The Vorthok bioships surged forward. Sensing victory, they had no idea they were flying into a trap. Commander Otaeon's destroyer squadron had been waiting for this moment. His ships had been hidden behind the larger vessels, their stealth systems making them invisible to the swarm's sensors. As the bioships rushed past the Indomitable, the destroyers struck from the flanks like wolves attacking a herd. "Destroyer Squadron Alpha, engage," Taeon commanded. His ships opened fire with gravitational pulse weapons, creating localized space-time distortions that crushed the bioships from within. The adaptive armor meant nothing when the attack came from the fabric of space itself. Meanwhile, Colonel Baijinsu's fighter wings were putting on a display of aerial artistry that would have been impossible for any other species. Human pilots, enhanced with neural interfaces and artificial intelligence, danced between the Vorthok tentacles with impossible grace. Their small fighters moved like deadly insects, too fast and agile for the bioship's weapons to track. "Squadron, going in hot," reported Major Kim Yujin from her fighter cockpit. "These things are big and slow, like shooting fish in a barrel." Her squadron unleashed a barrage of smart missiles that didn't just explode on impact. Instead, they burrowed into the bioship's hulls like technological parasites, releasing nanobots that attacked the creature's nervous systems directly. The bioships began to convulse and turn on each other, their adaptive capabilities overwhelmed by the microscopic invasion. But the real show was just beginning. Captain Lim Hyojin's heavy cruiser Retribution had been charging her main weapons while the smaller ships engaged the swarm. Her ship was built around a single massive gravitational cannon that could create artificial black holes. "Retribution to Fleet Command," she reported. "Singularity cannon charged and ready." Fire at will, Captain Kunte replied. The gravitational weapon discharged with a deep thrumming sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of space. A sphere of absolute darkness appeared in the center of the swarm formation. And suddenly, hundreds of bioships were being pulled toward it like leaves in a hurricane. The artificial black hole lasted only seconds before collapsing, but in that time it had consumed an entire section of the Vorthok fleet. The survivors tried to adapt, growing new thrusters and reinforcing their hulls. But gravity was not something that could be resisted through evolution. The bioships that had survived the singularity were scattered and disorganized, their formation completely broken. All ships, execute War Pattern Delta, Admiral Kunte commanded. Time for the killing stroke. The human fleet transformed once. Again, but this time they became something that would haunt the nightmares of any surviving Vorthok. They moved with the precision of a surgical instrument, each ship knowing exactly where to be and when to fire. It was like watching a deadly dance performed by masters who had been practicing for centuries. The Indomitable and her sister ships formed a battle line, their quantum cannons firing in perfect sequence. Each shot was timed to hit the bioships, just as they finished adapting to the previous attack, keeping them in a constant state of vulnerability. The destroyers provided covering fire while the fighters picked off any bioships that tried to break away. Inside the dying Kepler station, Captain Park Min-ho and the other survivors watched the battle through the facility's external cameras. They had seen the Vorthok swarm destroy 17 civilizations, had watched these creatures adapt to every weapon and overcome every defense, but they had never seen anything like this. "They're not just fighting," whispered Communications Officer Kim Nari, her voice filled with awe. "They're hunting. Those humans are hunting the swarm like they're prey animals." Engineering Chief Yudong-yuk nodded slowly. "Look at the formation. Patterns. Every move is calculated, every shot is placed exactly where it needs to be. They're not just trying to win the battle, they're trying to make it look easy." The truth was even more terrifying than the survivors realized. The human fleet wasn't just fighting the Vorthok swarm, they were teaching the galaxy a lesson about what happened when you threatened innocent people. Every move was designed not just for maximum military effect, but for maximum psychological impact. The swarm had spent thousands of years being the apex predator of the galaxy. They had grown used to being the hunters, the creatures that other species feared in their darkest nightmares. Now they were learning what it felt like to be prey. The silence that followed the battle was more deafening than the sound of weapons fire had been. Where moments before the space around Kepler Station had been filled with the writhing mass of 10,000 bioships, and now there was only empty void dotted with slowly expanding clouds of cosmic dust. The Vorthok swarm, the nightmare that had consumed 17 civilizations, was gone. Admiral Han Kung-tae stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his weathered hand still gripping the command rail as he surveyed the battlefield. The entire engagement had lasted exactly 6 hours and 43 minutes. 6 hours to destroy a force that had been terrorizing the galaxy for who knew how long. "Final casualty report," he said quietly to his tactical officer, Lieutenant An. Seol-yoon checked her displays with a look of disbelief. "Sir, we have 0 losses. Minor damage to 3 destroyers, but no casualties. The swarm is completely eliminated." Around the bridge, the crew stood in stunned silence. They had prepared for a desperate battle against overwhelming odds. Instead, they had delivered the most one-sided victory in galactic history. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Jung Soo-young, "we're receiving signals from the Kepler station. Multiple alien species, requesting permission to speak with you." Kyuntae nodded and straightened his uniform. "Open all channels. Let's talk to the survivors." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the damaged control room of Kepler Station. Captain Park Min-ho appeared on screen, his face streaked with tears and his voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his words barely a whisper. "Thank you for saving us. We watched 17 civilizations die, and we thought we were next. But who are you? What species could possibly destroy the Vorthok swarm so completely?" Before Admiral Kyuntae could answer, other alien faces appeared on the screen. There was Commander Zixstar from the Vegan Collective. Engineer Krilksaw from the Centauri Federation, and dozens of others representing species that had been thought extinct. "We've been hiding in the station's deepest levels," explained Dr. Tissera, a medical officer from the Andromedans. "The swarm kept us alive to study our technologies. We've been prisoners for months, watching our homeworlds burn through the bioship's neural networks." Admiral Kunte felt a cold rage building in his chest. These creatures hadn't just been destroying civilizations, they had been torturing the survivors, forcing them to watch their species die. "My name is Admiral Han Kunte of the Terran Defense Force," he said, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's military tradition. "We received your distress call 4 months ago. We came as soon as we could, Terran," gasped Captain Minho. "You mean ... you're human, but humans are just myths? Ancient legends about a warrior species that disappeared into the void?" Colonel Kang Yunji appeared on a secondary screen from her rescue ship. She was overseeing the evacuation of survivors from the station's damaged sections. Her medical teams working alongside alien refugees with quiet efficiency. "We are humanity," she said softly, her voice carrying across the communication channel. "We stopped fighting because we were too good at it. But when someone calls for help," she paused, watching as human soldiers gently carried wounded aliens to safety. "We remember why we were warriors in the first place." The truth was starting to spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours of the battle's end, the news had reached every major star system. Humanity, the legendary ghost species, had returned to the galaxy, and they had destroyed the Vorthok swarm in a single afternoon. The reaction was immediate and profound. Species that had been cowering in fear for months suddenly found hope again. The Galactic Council, which had been paralyzed by terror, began emergency sessions to discuss this new development. But not everyone was celebrating. "Sir," reported Intelligence Officer Lee Dong-yoon from his station, "we're intercepting communications from several star systems. Some species are concerned about our return." Kung Tae wasn't surprised. Humanity's reputation as warriors was well earned, and not everyone would be happy to see them back on the galactic stage. "What kind of concerns?" he asked. "The Regilian Empire is mobilizing their fleet. They're claiming that humanity's return represents a threat to galactic stability. The Tau Ceti Alliance is calling for restrictions on human military activity." "Captain," Song Wusong looked up from his command console. "Sir, are we going to have to fight our way through the galaxy to get home?" Kung Tae considered the question carefully. Humanity had returned to save innocent lives, but their very presence was already causing political upheaval. The galaxy had grown comfortable with the idea that humans were gone forever. "No," he said finally. "We're not going to fight anyone who doesn't threaten innocent lives. But we're also not going to hide anymore." He turned to his communications. "Officer, open a channel to all Terran vessels. I want to address the entire fleet." Within minutes, the faces of human commanders appeared on screens throughout the bridge. Captain Lim Hujin from the Retribution, Commander Otaeon from the Destroyer Squadron, Major General Nam Soyeon from the Ground Forces, all the leaders, who had just proven that humanity's military might was still second to none. Officers of the Terran Defense Force, Kinte began. "Today we have accomplished something that seemed impossible. We have saved innocent lives and eliminated a threat to galactic civilization. But our work is not finished." He paused, looking at each face on the screens. "For 200 years we chose isolation because we feared our own capacity for violence. We became so good at war that we nearly destroyed ourselves. But today we remembered something important. Our strength was never meant to be hidden away. It was meant to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The Admiral's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I am establishing the Terran Defense Compact, effective immediately. Any species that faces extinction, any civilization that calls for help against forces beyond their ability to handle, will find humanity ready to answer. We will not be the galaxy's conquerors. We will be its guardians." The response from the fleet was immediate and unanimous. Every ship captain, every military commander, every soldier who had awakened from cryosleep to fight this battle pledged their support to the new mission. But the most powerful response came from the survivors at Kepler Station. Captain Park, Minho spoke for all of them when he said, "If humanity is willing to be our protectors, then we will be your allies. The galaxy needs guardians, and we have seen today that humans are the best guardians we could ask for." As the human fleet began rescue operations and prepared for the long journey home, word of the Terran Defense Compact spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had thought themselves doomed began to hope again. The nightmare of the Vorthok swarm was over, but something new had begun. The sleeping giants were awake now, and they had remembered their purpose. They were not conquerors or destroyers. They were protectors, guardians who would ensure that no innocent species would ever face extinction alone. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in centuries, that was a good thing. The end.